G'day. Welcome to the Agricoach Podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. G'day, everyone. Welcome back to the Agricoach Wealth and Wisdom Podcast. I'm Ben Law, I'm the financial bloke, and I'll be your host today. Today's episode is one I've been looking forward to for a while. We're joined by David Westbrook, a cracking good bloke with a remarkable story of resilience and determination when it comes to succession. David went through a pretty tumultuous journey on his own family farm succession, so challenging in fact that he initially walked away from the process. But as life is a way of coming full circle, and several years later, he found himself reopening conversations with his father and mother and finally agreeing to come back to the farm. In this episode, we'll dive into David's personal story, what made him step away in the first place, the emotional and professional challenges he faced, and why he and his wife and his family decided to come back. We'll talk about the real, honest and sometimes messy business of farm succession and family dynamics. And through it all, David will share insights that might just change the way you think about navigating the tough conversations at home and in your business. Now, before we jump in, I just want to remind everyone that these topics can be highly sensitive. Our goal today is to share experiences and strategies in a way that is respectful and supportive. David has generously agreed to open up about what's been a challenging time for him and his family. So let's honour this willingness to be real with us and also give his mum and dad the respect they deserve. All right then, without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with David Westbrook. I hope you find it as powerful and enlightening as I have. Well, g'day, Westy. Welcome to the podcast, mate. It's great to have you on.
Ben, thank you so much, mate. Thank you for having me and really, really excited to be here. And what you do for your community is amazing. So super excited to be part of that.
That's bloody fantastic, mate. So now let's just get right into this, mate. Now, you've got a really, well, I hesitate to say good, but you've got a great story to tell, which is sometimes going to be a bit difficult. But where I want to sort of fill everyone in is you started the succession process with your family that sort of ultimately didn't go to plan. And eventually it led to your wife and yourself walking away and pursuing another career. But after about 5 years, you said your family reached out about coming back to the table, and now you and your wife have made the decision to re-engage and come back to the farm and restart the succession and take over. Now, have I got that all right? And if I have, roughly, can you just sort of talk us through the timeline of events and how this all played out?
Yeah, absolutely. You've nailed it. I think we can finish the podcast there, Ben. You've covered it off. That's our journey, absolutely. And we don't, it's I'm not sure if it's a great story, but it's taught us a lot. And the great thing about it is that it's helped us making our learnings over the last 20 or 30 years. It's taught us so much. Those difficult situations, we can look at them as a negative, but we've been lucky enough to have the right people around us to support us through some of those challenging times and turn them into positives and learn so much from it. So really happy to try and share as much as we can to help others. And that's what we love. Giving back ultimately is a great thing to be able to do. So it's a privilege for us. So I guess just to sort of frame it up, I grew up on a broadacre cropping farm, which was on the York Peninsula, so some really, really great country through there in South Australia. And it was a very legacy kind of, I'm not sure the best way to explain it, old school, or like there's a lot of pride in the Westbrook legacy there. I think my papa went his separate way from his dad back in the day, and a lot of hard work to build up a successful farm. And then two sons come home onto that farm, which was obviously my dad and my uncle. And that's sort of where I come into it. And I just grew up in that environment with Nana being the matriarch and Papa and Dad and my uncle doing all the hard yards out in the field. And grew up. It was really successful and they were really proud of what they did. And that's all they talked about really, was all the things that succeeded in farming and how many rabbits they shot with 99 rabbits out of 100 bullets and all those little stories that I grew up with. So that was sort of my foundational stuff. And then I would come straight home from school, straight back into that. Always wanted to be a farmer and come back in. And probably I was lucky enough to play SANFL football, so semi-professional Aussie rules footy in Adelaide. And that, I look back at that and kind of say that was my boarding school experience. So I missed that, getting out off the farm and out of the local rural community into the big smoke. Yeah, so football was that for me when I was 18, 19. So I did that for 4 years and loved it but hated it at the same time. As a country bloke, couldn't wait to get out of the city. Met a lot of great people, broadened my horizons, learned a lot of life skills. Met my wife, went back home to the farm with mum and dad, and my brother was just finishing up school there as well, and he was going to come home on the farm, and probably did 6 or 8 months and realised I wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and I wasn't enjoying it, and I just had different perspective on what I wanted to get out of the farm than what I was getting out of it. And then that's where succession really started happening. This was 2008.
And how old were you then?
I was about 23. Like a lot of my good mates were 10 or so years older than me, and I was probably a bit ahead of my time in what I wanted to achieve, which is one of the interesting parts of succession is expectation. I saw myself as a leader and as a business owner and wanted to drive it a little bit differently to Dad. But the reality was he was in his 50s. He still had a long way to go. So
he still had plenty of miles on the tyres left, and he still wanted to drive things his way. And then you were coming back challenging the traditional ways of doing things, which is pretty normal in a family, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. 100%, even in, well, pretty much every situation. Like there's always going to be a difference. So it took me a long while to work this out, but the easiest way to explain it is that our values were different. And I'm sure you won't mind me saying, but like there's one situation, there's lots of situations I tried to work it out with mum and just trying to understand my place in it and how it was all going to go. And I think the one thing that we want as the younger generation is just clarity. We want to know what's happening rather than get up at 6 a.m. Like I was living 100 metres away from mum and dad, but it was still like you'd be there for dinner and all the talk was farming and there was no sort of other talk. It was just, what we're doing tomorrow. And then you rock up at tomorrow and the plans are changed. And so there's no certainty or no clarity on that role. And I think that's what you need when you're coming through your early 20s and you're passionate, you've got this big vision for yourself and for your family and for your farm, but then that sort of gets taken away because it's just making it up on the fly a little bit.
Do you think if Dad was, say, 5 to 10 years older, that would have been different?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. We got married in 2008, decided to go on a 3-month road trip around Western Australia, and that was amazing. And on that trip, we actually decided, I said to Becky, my wife, I said, look, let's go home, let's renovate the farm, the workers' cottage where we lived, which was quite a nice house, and let's make a real go at it. And I think that lasted about 2 weeks after we were home. I was not myself. I was angry, I was frustrated, and it was quite evident that I wasn't being myself and wasn't living to my values. So that Christmas, I told Dad that I was going to move to Adelaide or move to Kangaroo Island, which is where Becky's from, and start a landscaping or earth moving business over there. That was the plan. So I moved back to Adelaide for a year and to get my builder's license. Yeah, so that conversation was hard for me, but I guess I could clearly see that I could either stay and be miserable for however many years until maybe one day I got the farm given to me, or I could take control of my own destiny and, jump off a cliff, I suppose, and go and create my own life with not much money and there's millions of dollars of farm assets sitting there. But I don't know, a lot of people will resonate with this. They'll be either side. They'll be, wondering whether they should have went and done something else or maybe they did go do something else. And it's never easy. It's a very, very challenging position to be in. And I think, obviously in your podcast before, you would talk a lot about communication. To frame up mine and Dad's communication was, I didn't even tell him I was going on a 3-month trip. So essentially I was his employee. The only communication that indicated that I was leaving the farm for a while was every night after work, I'd go up and do some welding on my camper and had it all laid out. And he could obviously see I was planning something, but we actually never talked about it, which is really strange. So communication is really awkward, I think, in different personalities in farming and that we just didn't have any and that didn't help at all.
So looking back at that time, Westy, when you were going through this, if you knew what you knew now, so, you've obviously grown as a person, you've matured. How old are you now?
Just turned 40.
Just turned 40, yeah. So you got a lot of miles on the tyres now and experience. If you sort of looked back at that stage there, if you knew what you knew now and the skills that you've got to communicate, do you think things would have been different?
Yeah, to a degree.
But significantly different?
It would be significantly different, but I don't know which way. My gut is kind of saying that I would have not gone back to the farm to start with.
Yeah.
If I had the skills I got now and the wisdom that I got now, I would have understood the challenges with succession, even though farming, it's who I feel like I am and what I'm most passionate about. And obviously I'll explain what else I've done outside of farming. But I think I just would have been clear on what I was going to get and not have those hopeful expectations where you're just sort of hoping that you're going to get control and you're going to be able to run your own show. But in saying that, I've had a lot of lessons around speaking your truth. As a kid growing up, there's a lot of unconscious, not blaming parents, but there's a lot of unconscious conditional love. And that conditional love is, if you do this, then you'll get this. And then that comment was made a lot. Like, if you work, like you have to work hard or work, I don't know, ridiculous hours and Sundays and miss out on this party and miss out on that event with your friends because you're going to get the farm one day. So there's a lot of conditional things put on us. And with communication and that bit of wisdom and vulnerability, I think you can iron that out a little bit and take that conditional stuff out, because it's, no matter what relationship you're in, that conditional love, it's probably the easiest way to explain it, all that conditional expectation, it's a killer. And it kind of rips your heart out a little bit, and there's a lot of hope and expectation in there. So if you can have those conversations around where everyone sits in the family and get that on paper, in saying that, I'm not sure if everyone would be open to that as well. Like, just because I'm open to that doesn't mean everyone else is open to that.
So when you said you needed clarity at that age, and just reconfirm, sorry, what age were you roughly around there where you decided to pull the pin?
22 or 23.
22, 23, yeah. So in hindsight, looking back, what sort of clarity were you needing to give you the comfort to move forward?
Yeah. Do you know, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I was coaching someone the other day, and in their coaching form pre-work, it had succession as a big issue for them. And when we got into the call, I asked him, I said, what would you change if succession actually happened and you had control of the business? What would you actually change? And funnily enough, he said nothing. I was like, well, what's the issue with succession? So much of it is kind of in our mind, if that makes sense. And I've got another mate who ran his farm for 5 or 6 or 7 years with no influence from his parents, except for the fact that they own the land and the business. And then he said the day that that paperwork got signed, it felt completely different and completely freeing, but nothing changed. So there's a little bit of psychology around that. And that's for someone else to unpack, and I reckon everyone can resonate with that a little bit. But for me, it's a hard one to answer, but I guess there's a really clear moment for me where I made my mind up. And our house it was on a hill. It's a big German homestead, 100 and something years old. You could drive a Land Cruiser down the hallway. It was a magnificent house overlooking, you could see for 30, 40 kilometres. The view was just a beautiful location. And Dad decided to build a hay shed in front of it down the hill. So in my mind, I was already building my family and what I wanted to do, and put a pond out the front. And like when you got hours and hours on the tractor, and you're sort of building your vision just subconsciously a little bit. And so when that shed went up, I sort of thought, well, that's like, I didn't say anything, but I probably wouldn't have done it. And then I was starting to think about moving when I start a family, move into Mum and Dad's house. And so I was thinking 10 years ahead. So I went and planted some trees behind that shed. So in 10 years' time, when I live in that house, you can't really see the shed. There's nice trees instead. And Dad drove down when I was doing it, and he absolutely tore strips off me.
For planting some trees?
For not spraying the grass before I planted the trees.
Oh, okay, yep.
And I actually sat on the concrete of the shed and cried, and decided at that moment that's when I'm going to leave the farm. And it's a few weeks after that I told Dad. So it's kind of funny, those little visions that we have for ourselves that kind of get shut down and we're made wrong about. You really start to doubt yourself, and then the little things turn into really big things.
Because there's not one thing that was a problem. It was a culmination of small little issues over the years that come to a head at some stage. And planting some trees is the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, it was in that. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of other things, and just the control, maybe the control of feeling like you're controlled to make sure you're doing the right thing and keeping everyone happy, and missing out on, you can't go out on a Saturday night because you got to do some jobs that don't actually need doing. What
were you fearing? So you know how you said before you needed some clarity, and what was actually, 23 to 28-year-old David, what were you actually fearing back then if you stayed within the family business rather than leaving?
Good question. It's probably...
You've worked bloody hard to build a profitable, scalable and well-run operation. But now, as your children are finishing their education and starting to take an interest in the family business, you're realising it's time to shift focus. It's no longer just about farm prosperity. It's now about family prosperity. You need to align your family, start preparing the next generation, improve communication and strengthen family relationships. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. And that's why we created the High Performing Families Workshop, to guide families through this crucial transition. Want to know more? Head over to www.agricoach.com.au/take action. Now, let's head back to the episode.
I am a visionary, so I have, that's what motivates me, that kind of entrepreneurship. So you've got so much power inside of you that's been suppressed. Yeah, and if I went into a bit of a spiritual kind of side of it and had a spiritual guide explaining it to me, there'd be some deeper stuff there around what my fears really were. So yeah, there's probably some more deeper unconscious fears in there that might be around not being good enough, not being able to, feeling like I've got to prove myself to Dad, and if I want to do something and he doesn't approve of it, then I'm the failure. But then I don't enjoy what he wants to do. It's confusing. Succession is not succession, but
family dynamics, intergenerational family dynamics.
Family dynamics, yeah. Whether it's brother and sister, brother, sister, father, whatever it might be, it's really, really confusing. Any relationship doesn't even have to be family. It can be anyone that's working with another boss or with other people, farmhands or whatever. That it can be quite confusing understanding the situations.
Because it's interesting, mate. Because I'm 47 now, so I'm a few years ahead of you, and I've been sort of floating around in this game for 25 years now, and I've spent a lot of time working with families at different age groups. And normally, when this succession thing starts to raise its head, or starts to, is mum and dad are in their early 50s, and the kids are in their sort of early to mid 20s. That's usually when I see people pop up. And what happens is mum and dad start thinking, well, we've probably got another 10 years left in us. Dad probably says 25, 30, but mum's usually saying, we've probably got another 10 years, early 60s. And then the kids are sort of at 23, have probably got another 7 or 8 years before they really hit their straps on average. So 28 to 32, I've noticed for men, is usually when they hit their straps. And that's when the family needs to be bolting them into some sort of responsibility. And then mum and dad, usually around that 58 to 65 is when they're sort of transitioning, not necessarily land or control, but they're starting to transition leadership and give more responsibility to the next generation. And when you sit down with families, mums and dads in their 50s, is they fear, I've asked plenty of them what they fear, and mums fear on average that their relationships will break down. The sons or daughters will come back and push because they want their go, and then relationships will break down. And dad fears that someone's going to take the bat and ball off him and he's not going to be in control, because he goes, I'm 52, 53, 54. I've still got another 10 years left in me. I'm not ready to step aside. So, and they fear that next generation's either going to push them off the throne, the old succession of the king and the queen, or the kids are going to be entitled and not work for it. And so they quite often overcompensate. So they'll be harder on their kids, or try to talk to everyone, oh, my son's spoiled. He goes into town on Saturday and plays footies with his mates and he's not ready at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. And then the kids sitting around usually are sitting there going, well, what I fear, and this is just my anecdotal evidence, is that mum and dad are never going to give me my go. I'm going to work for the next 10, 20, 30 years and I'm never going to get my go. And when you speak to young men, and I'm going to use young men as an example, most of the time they're not looking, we want the farm, we want everything transferred into our name now. They just want their go. They just want to be able to push forward and drive, and especially entrepreneurial and driven ones. And so if you've got the 55-year-old or 52-year-old not ready to give up, you've got the 23 to 25-year-old that's like, I know everything, I'm ready to go, give me my go, you're going to end up with friction. And you can even have the most well-skilled communicators in the world, but you're going to have different age groups. That's where the old bull, young bull comes from. But then if you've got this different values across the generations, where I know in my family, you don't talk about conflict, you don't have conflict, and then the next generation says, well, I want to have this out now and I want clarity and tell me where you're going to go, and it's just a recipe for stress and problems in the family.
100%. It's very, very tricky. I think one thing that sort of come up for me there when you're sharing that around the fear was not being able to, if you think about it, like Papa had to pioneer essentially, and most of his career was picking stones or picking stumps or whatever, and so the scarcity mindset was there. If I look on mum's side, mum had a family of 5 and she was the oldest, and she had to go and trap rabbits. Her mum and dad were working 2 or 3 jobs. She had to go trap rabbits to feed her siblings. So it's not very long ago. And now we're not even driving tractors. We've got robotic tractors out there and whatnot. And if we are driving, well, most of us are still driving tractors, but they're pretty flash. I went to drive my brother's tractor, didn't even know how to start that one. So we've come so far in such a short time. So I think one of my fears was that what I wanted to do was too far outside of the scarcity mindset of what mum and dad, both on the monetary side, but also on the what's acceptable, where if you're going out on a Saturday night, or even if you have got the money and you go buy that Land Cruiser ute, it's too fancy. Like, you can't be successful. There's almost a fear of success and scarcity around success as well. So,
well, it's also about what will the neighbours think. It's like there's this cultural thing, I had this discussion with someone the other day, Westy, where there was a guy where I grew up, and I remember someone saying once, he got caught for stealing cattle duffing, and put in jail for 6 months. And, he's a criminal. He's stealing local farmers' cattle. And anyhow, I remember hearing a farmer one day say, he's that bloke, he's a thief, but geez, he knows how to work. And it was almost like there was this thing of, he's a bad guy and I don't like his values and he's dishonest, but geez, he can work. And so we measure in the rural community a lot about our value is based on how hard we can work and how hard we can actually do it. And as soon as we turn around and have it, just simple things like go to town, as you mentioned, and have a night out with your mates or go on a holiday, it's like you're becoming entitled, you're spoiled, you don't understand what's involved. And that can be really confronting for some of the older generation.
Yeah. Look, I had these conversations with Dad. I just don't think they understand it. We're lucky in this generation to be open to a whole new set of skills and learning from successful businessmen from around the world where they were kind of just making it up as they went. And I remember... like that's where Dad's pride come from was, and growing up, I remember feeling successful if I was busy. And Dad actually said to me one day, we were seeding or planting, depends which part of Australia you're in. And I had dinner and then I went out and started the night shift and took over from him. And he said, you could see for 40K, so you could see all the other tractors in the distance. And he said, his passing words as he jumped out the tractor was, you got to be the last person to turn your lights off tonight. And it's an egotistical kind of, you've got to work harder than everyone else, and then we're successful.
Yeah, well, that's your personal value. If you don't, you're a lazy and entitled, aren't you? And that's the death spiral for a family in their eyes.
Yeah, so there's a tricky balance between we need to work hard, but we need to work hard for the right reasons. It's the same as a good stockman, pressure on, pressure off. I think it's the same in business. Pressure on in the right areas. There's no point in working hard in the wrong areas. But sometimes we've just got to get in and get the work done and get rewarded for that, but make sure that we've got the right values that underpin that.
Now, mate, so you're coming back now. It's been reopened. How did that reopen, mate? And if you feel comfortable enough, just talk me through that.
Yeah. So what happened is when I was in Adelaide getting my builder's license, ready to move to Kangaroo Island, Dad rang me and he said, we've got a friend selling a farm on Kangaroo Island. Would you be interested in looking at it? And it was it was a left field idea. And I sort of thought, absolutely. And at the time I was struggling with not being able to be a farmer. So that was music to my ears, really. And the process was same thing. There's not a heap of communication there, but it was, we'll guarantee you and Becky to buy your own farm on Kangaroo Island. So we went to Kangaroo Island, had a look at some farms, didn't buy that one, but we bought another one. And that was all set up in mine and Becky's name. Mum and Dad were directors and part of all of that. And it was absolute gold. I was so excited, pioneering, buying cattle and sheep and starting a whole livestock was my passion, not cropping. So for me to be able to move to a high rainfall zone and beautiful country and in a whole new community and start our own farm on Kangaroo Island was absolutely magic. So that was awesome. It was a dream come true. A completely different, somewhere where I've never thought I would go. And if I look back, the stuff I loved when I was a kid growing up was understanding merino studs and cattle studs and all, and that kind of picture that vision, if that makes sense. So all of a sudden I've sort of found myself in there, what I kind of envisioned as a child. So that happened, that was 2010. And then the cracks started to appear a little bit when money started going between accounts. And I understand where they were and they'd obviously put a lot in to buy another farm on Kangaroo Island. But then money kind of had to be taken out of our account to go into their account, and no one knew how much profit we were making. And I wanted to start in the early days, it didn't matter because I just wanted to get outside and farm. But then I started learning a bit more. I started learning about key performance indicators and what that meant and what my stocking rate should be and genetics, the value of genetics and all that sort of stuff. And that was sort of all getting knocked on the head. Hey, we should go buy this ram. No, you just buy the cheap ones or do this or do that. And so then that's when succession really started to open up again. So we built a successful farm. And my motto there was the harder you work, the more successful you are as well. And interestingly enough, it took me a while to work this out, but I was trying to prove myself to Dad. On the outside, I probably showed I didn't really care, but deep down I did, and I probably didn't realise it. I was trying to prove myself to me that I can be good at this. And I was trying to prove myself for the community. So working hard, even to a point where you go to the local coffee shop and maybe, what have you been up to? Oh, I'm flat out. And you'd always express how busy you are and thought that was successful. I feel it's crazy if you are proud with how hard you're working, I think, at the moment. So I was able to change that motto or change my whole outlook with some good mentors around me that helped me see where I should, what my true values were, and starting to run that farm as a business, not as a farm. So my bookkeeping, my management skills, everything was thrown out the window because I was just working too hard on the wrong things. So when I was able to shift that around, the farm became really profitable, employed people, scaled it up. My KPIs were right up there with some of the top ones. So that was 2015. And then the turning point for us was and we were trying to do some things and it wasn't really working. And then it was a long time ago now. It was 10 years ago now, but got the phone call from mum and dad, and they basically said, we're taking the farm off you. It's your sister's coming home from Melbourne. She wants to be part of the farm. We're going to start this whole, we're taking it out of your name. We're going to put all the farms back joint together, and you're going to be on 600 and something bucks a week.
Wow. And
you're going to be working for us, working for a wage.
So not only did you think you had full autonomy and a vision of the future, it got chipped away at over time, and then all of a sudden the rug completely got pulled out.
Yeah, 100%. So that was, I still remember, I can still feel it, sitting on the couch in disbelief, not really understanding what had just happened. And there was some, maybe I'll get more out of Succession because the Kangaroo Island value wasn't as much as back home, and that, a little bit of discussion around that. But all the wind was taken out of my sails because you're driving so hard and you want to be successful. Then all of a sudden it's okay, well, what's the point? But got back on the horse and realised that it's still my farm and still got management and all that sort of stuff. And then a lot of that management stuff was just a miscommunication and difference in values, again, with what I wanted to achieve. And I think social media was there a little bit, and they were probably saying, you live on Kangaroo Island, you're going to be at the beach from time to time and those sort of things. And so they were probably getting a false idea of how hard I was working and what we were achieving.
So you were violating that whole being the last person in the tractor at the end of the night. They built up in their mind, whether that be true or not, the fact that you were essentially structuring things to skive off and have a great lifestyle and not put in the hard yards that you were required or should be doing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like I was doing the exact opposite. I was actually making it really, really successful, and benchmarking was kind of showing that, and we were heading in the right direction. So there was a big confidence knock and whatnot. And then therefore, was it 2015. And then it got to a point where it took a massive toll on me and Becky and our family, to a point where you come home. I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this. You work, you're outside on the farm, you come home and you just vent. You spend the next 2 or 3 hours on the couch or whatever, just venting, and kids are listening, and we tried our best not to, but it just gets the better of you emotionally and mentally. And didn't feel like I was suffering from depression, but there was one moment where some anger came out. We were doing some social stuff down the beach in a public setting, and I cried the whole way there. I couldn't drive. I was in tears the whole way there. I didn't know why. I couldn't get out of the car. So the kids and Becky went off, and it was a sandcastle building competition. And eventually I willed myself to get out of the car, went and helped our youngest one build a sandcastle. When the judge came over and he said, oh, that's a nice such and such. And it was something completely different to what we were building. And it made me so angry because he was like, mate, come on, it's a
turtle, it's not a fox.
That's it. And I just observed myself going, I'm not good here. And I would walk back and sat in the car and spent hours and hours and hours sitting on. I had some really good mentors around me, so I was able to feel my emotions and express them, and just sit on the deck and with the dogs and be emotional for an hour or two here and there, and just let it out. I didn't bottle it up and didn't show too much anger, but every now and then it just sort of, things come out and you go, this is not me. We need to do something about this. And we pushed everything we could, Succession-wise. There's probably things we could have done a lot better, communication-wise, and I was scared of speaking my truth. I actually ended up with glandular fever, nearly got flown off in a helicopter because my health was going backwards so quick. And that's when we decided. A good mate of mine who was helping me, he said, Westy, you need to man the F up and make a decision. Because I used to talk to him about it all the time, and he said, it's just going on and on and on. Like, man the F up and make a decision. What are you going to do?
Are you in or you're out?
Are you staying or are you leaving? And I said, I'm leaving. And then he said, when are you going to tell him? And as soon as he said that, I felt comfortable saying I'm leaving. But as soon as he said, when are you going to tell him, I felt very uncomfortable, because probably deep down I was never going to tell him. I was just going to stay there, pretend I'm leaving and say that I'm leaving, and stay there and stay there and stay there and stay there. I said Thursday. had a few conversations and tried to work a few things out. Then it come to a point where, not blaming Dad, everyone's just different for this, but we had a few conversations because he would bring the truck over and take stock back to his farm and bring grain over and that. So there's a couple of times he was coming over in the truck and we had a few heated discussions and tried to work it out. And there's a few comments made and I said, well, if that's the case, I'm out. And I remember standing there by the truck where the grain was run up into the silo, and it was the last day I worked on my farm. Packed everything up that day and essentially homeless. And we're lucky we had a couple of little blocks, a 3-acre block of land up the coast, and we bought a little old kind of almost derelict house that was on the corner of the farm on 5 acres. That was in mine and Becky's name, so we had that as well. But we had to go and wrangle and find another job and find a house to rent, and we couldn't afford any rent, so we had to negotiate a cheap rent with some holiday rental that had no people staying in it for 6 months. So we had a lot of people around us that picked us up and really supported us, which if we didn't have that, I'm not sure how we could have survived. But I guess there's a lot of vulnerability in that and a lot of asking for help.
There's a lot of judgment as well, isn't there? Like, that's what I always fear. I know when I had my heart scare in the business and had to make some big changes, mate, the fear was just, what would people think? And can I actually be authentic and real and say what's on my mind without, well, comfortably and a bit risk looking like a fool?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was lucky enough. I wouldn't have done it if I still had that mentality, but I was doing a lot of personal growth through this period, and we actually had a quote stuck up on our toilet wall. I can't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, when you're 25 or something, you don't care what anyone thinks. And when you're 25 to 40, you worry about what everyone thinks. And when you're 60 plus, you don't give a shit what anyone thinks. And what I realised is that quote, I've just made a mess of it, but it basically means what other people think of you is none of your business. And I really believe that. So, yeah, I was able to do everything on my terms without worrying about what other people thought, which was probably my biggest downfall previously. Always worried about what everyone thought, always was a little bit egotistical, made sure that my best sheep were, or my paddocks along the main road were looking good and my best sheep were in those paddocks and all that sort of stuff, worrying about what other people were doing, looking in and their judgment, but was able to let that go.
How did the relationship with Dad go then, mate? Like, because you obviously exited, you went onto the farm, then you went on your own, you decided to go down on your own path, which you've been doing. How did that go with Dad? Did it sort of just shut the door and we just both went our separate ways, or was there's some friction there for a while, some back and forth?
Yeah, I'd still need to talk to Dad about it and probably debrief it a little bit, but I think what happened is it really offended him. So it probably there's a whole extra workload. It would have checked his ego and the family legacy as well. So,
well, it might have also reinforced the fact that he, deep down, he was worried you were entitled and lazy, and this just reconfirmed it, as well in his mind.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. I think I did ask him, like, why didn't you listen to me when I said, we needed to work a few things out, otherwise I'm going to go. And he said, I didn't believe you. So I think when I did go, it was a smack in the face for him. There's still guilt from me to a degree that I left him in that position and the relationship was finished there, father-son. Yeah, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I had to look after myself and my family and our values. Yeah, it was challenging. I think it made him, probably a lot angrier. And, I didn't speak to him for 4 or 5 years, so I wasn't really sure where he was at. Yeah, no, okay. And so then you went off and you've started this coaching journey, and then, which we can come back to later, but you started on that process, which was a real growth period for you, and then had it back open, mate. Like, you're heading back to the farm, like you're right in the middle of the process of moving back to the farm. How do you go from not talking to I'm now back on the farm? Yeah, when we left the farm, we moved to Kangaroo Island and that was Becky's home. And so the most challenging thing was driving through town and seeing Dad's ute. I'd feel sick in the stomach seeing his ute, or I had to drive past my farm every day to go to my new job. So I'd see them out in my paddocks, and it was gut-wrenching for a couple of years, to a point where, so I did the Platinum program with Farm Owners Academy in 2015, 16 and 17. And that's where I learned all my personal growth and business skills there. And Andrew Roberts, who was the co-founder, he's the one that he said, if it doesn't work out on the farm, would love to employ you in Farm Owners Academy. So that's where I went as a business coach in Farm Owners Academy from 2018. And so I went on that journey. A couple of years in, we were just struggling living on the island and realised that we need to leave. We need to get off the island. We don't feel comfortable here. It's a big black cloud hanging over our home. And we spent 7 months on the road visiting clients, which was a dream come true. And when we got back, I realised I'd let it go. I realised I'd I didn't really care anymore. Look, I'd moved on from the farm and I could see Dad down the street and say good day and all that sort of stuff and whatnot. And then not long after I'd sort of settled into my new role, got a phone call from Mum saying, would you be interested in coming back and having a discussion about succession and potentially coming back to the farm? And basically what had happened is that they were resetting up some trusts and everything and had their solicitor and lawyer and all that sort of stuff. And they suggested that we kickstart succession again.
How old's Dad now?
It's a good question, 68 or 9. I think he was might turn 69.
Okay, so he's in the phase now where he's gone, I'm not in my early 50s, mid-50s. I've got that 10 years. Now I'm in the position where I go, hey, I need to do something about this.
Yeah, and he still works like he's in his mid-40s. I don't know how he does it, to be honest.
My dad's 75 and still doing the same thing.
Yeah, righto. Yeah, which is kind of great. There's different ways to approach that, but it's good that they're still, I'd like to see him slow down and a few other different things. But he actually said to me that there's a few people around him that have either passed on or getting sick, and that was a bit of a realisation for him that it's probably is time that he does something about it. I think he probably wasn't really ready, but anyway, we got a family communication lawyer to come in and that was all really driven by Mum. And in the meantime, my brother's in the same boat as what I was 5 years ago. He sort of was looking to really dive into succession and get some clarity on where him and his family were going. Well, it was a challenging process and there's a few different meetings and with the idea of let's just get family Christmas happening again. What does it need to look like? That's the ultimate goal. And then what does it need to look like? So then the whole discussions around who should get what and what's fair and how it should all look. And I don't think we couldn't and still can't entirely agree on what that looks like. Kangaroo Island's pretty easy because it's kind of separate, but between my brother and sister and what's happening back there is a little bit trickier. So it's still in play. But that's essentially how it all happens. Just initial meeting, let's have a chat. I was quite surprised when they suggested that we could all move through succession and give everyone what they wanted. So it's been in play since 2023, so a couple of years. One of the most challenging parts to that was, so I was working full-time with Farm Owners Academy. I was doing 40 hours in 4 days, so I had Wednesdays off. Being a farmer, 5 days straight on a computer in an office, I realised wasn't doable for me, so I had to have Wednesday off. And Wednesday for me was just recovery. It was jobs around the house, have a surf, whatever, just re-energise so I could give my full energy to our clients. That soon filled up with a day where this Mum suggested, hey, if you want to kind of show Dad that you're serious, I suggest that you go back and give him a hand on Wednesdays on your day off. That was the toughest thing I've done in my life. Walk back onto that farm for the first time on my farm being told what to do.
You got to let a lot go, don't you?
Oh, 100%, yeah. So being told what to do by Dad's workman and I didn't agree with a lot of it because it was so, not saying he was wrong, but it was so different to how I'd operated in the past. And then frustration come in. Why have they bought those sheep? Why have they got that? Why have they done that? Why have they put that fence there? Then I had to work through that as well. So it's a lot of letting go and a lot of, don't know how I did it, to be honest. And then it kind of evolved a little bit and the workman moved on and I took over management in the middle of last year. Still working 2 days a week with Farm Owners Academy while managing that property. And so it's challenging. So still going through the process, but the communication's a lot better. There's structure. That's the key. There's structure behind it with Mum and Dad's accountant, Mum and Dad's solicitors and lawyers and all that sort of stuff. So they're driving it with us sort of asking for clarity and progress and making sure the ball is still moving and things are still going to plan.
It's funny, mate. One of the big pieces of advice I give the next generation coming through is if you've got mum and dad who are set in their ways, and I'm not suggesting your mum and dad are set in your ways or making any judgment there, I'm just saying in general terms, is to stop trying to change mum and dad because you're not going to change them. All you can do is change you, like work on the things you can control. And if you can improve your communication skills, if you can build your resilience mentally, if you can change your mindset in the right way and then strategically chart a path and go there, it's going to be far easier than sitting around and trying to wish that the older generation would actually change or do things differently. And quite often you need external parties to do that, which it sounds like you've got.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think you're spot on there. And one of the interesting things was when I was farming and pushing the boundaries and wanted to really drive the business, I think I was at like 5,500 sheep and 100 odd cattle, and I wasn't happy. I was happy, but deep down I was like, I just want to I want to get to 8,000 sheep. Then I want to get to 10,000. It was this, that, never. And it was very evident when I built a new set of sheep yards and they'd just been put in, and the next morning, and so the sheep yards that we inherited on that farm were all fallen over and not really serviceable. And I remember walking up and seeing those sheep yards, and a thought coming to my head, it was, I can't wait to be able to put a roof over those yards. And I was like, hang on a sec, I've just built a dream set of yards and now I'm not happy because I don't have a roof over it. A few years on, a couple of years ago, I was like, our goal was to buy 100 acres and just have 100 acres with a couple of dogs and a motorbike and let the kids have a motorbike again. So our expectations had gone from wanting 10,000 sheep to, 30 sheep would be a life goal all of a sudden. So our mindset around what we expect as kids growing up on the farm and that expectation from mum and dad, I think the key there is being clear with each other what mum and dad expect from their kids and what the kids expect from mum and dad and from the farm, and not just like it can be seen as being entitled, but we kind of expect that the role is you've been built up, you've been told you're going to get the farm. We kind of expect the farm, and then it never comes. So my conclusion there is that there's actually probably 10, 15, maybe 20 years of there is no answer. There's almost no answer in succession formally, or no real written golden rules around how it can work. Son and daughter and mum and dad or whatever it is, they've got to work together as a balancing act there for some time. And that's why people like yourself are absolute gold and non-negotiable. I think having people like yourself and what you do around businesses is a non-negotiable, because you just can't work it out. There's no golden rule, and you're not going to be able to get anywhere without people around you.
Yeah, and I think the big issue is that most families, they don't know. And so as soon as you see the younger generation saying, mum, dad, what's going to happen? Mum and dad don't know. And they're like, well, we're not really sure how this will work out, which causes stress in them. And then they think they need to have all the answers. And so it's a really complex stage. So for me personally, succession should not be a thing that you do when mum and dad are 65 and the kids are 35. Like, succession is just good business practice. Like, you should be talking about those things. And I personally believe you start succession the day they hit the ground. You start talking about when they're born. You start talking about family values. You start talking about the legacy that's come before them. You start talking about a vision for the future. You talk about the when-thens, the fact that you've got to educate yourself and you've got to get the right mindset, and we need to drive this business forward, but you can't be entitled. And, there's this whole apprenticeship phase that we've got to go through. And then when mum and dad were in their 40s and they're raising young children, they then have to transition from a farmer role to a leadership for the family and a custodian of the family wealth. So there's these transitions we've all got to go through. And, when young men, I believe personally, about 27 is when you start to hit your straps. Like, that's where you grow up. And I can remember being in London working for a hedge fund. And I remember that was the stage that I grew up and stopped thinking like a young man and thinking like a man. And there was that real distinct change. So there's a real challenge when it comes to families. But I think what families need to do is start early, start having those discussions and realizing that the solution doesn't have to come overnight. And if you work on communication and trust, because that's about 60% of the reason successions fail. So communication and trust, 60% of the reasons why it all falls apart. Not having a strategic plan in place for where we're going, because clarity, where are we going? And I've seen over the years, mate, when you sit a family down and say, well, where do we all want to be in 10 years? And we're all able to get that out and put it on paper and have a plan, that takes a lot of the angst out of the next generation. And then when we can start talking about values, what's our most important values and how does that work, and understanding our communication styles, well, you file off a lot of those edges and take away those points of failure in the relationship. But that's hard, because we don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about strategic planning. We just talk about what paddock we're going to, plant tomorrow, what the crops are going to look like, how much water we've got, what bulls we're going to buy. Operationally just takes over the whole process, which makes it awful hard for families. So my number one piece of advice is you need to be starting having serious discussions as a family around what the future looks like 10 to 15 years before you're ready to pull up stumps. So you need to be, as parents, 45 to 55, you need to be heavily into that strategic planning for what is the next phase, and you need to prepare yourself for the next phase, which is because ultimately everyone wants to retire. A lot of dads say they don't, but mums definitely do. They don't want to work on the farm, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They want to go see grandkids and travel and have a life. They've got to financially prepare for that. You've got to prepare the business to be able to do that. You've got to scale it up. You've got to have the capacity to take on multiple people in the business, the next generation. You've got to think about, well, how do we financially help out the non-farming siblings, because, that whole equal and fairness discussion, but also you're going to prepare the next generation to be able to lead and deal as a family. So it's a complex task, and it takes 10 to 15 years to basically do properly. And that's what the successful families do, Westy, is they actually see it as an issue when the kids are young and then focus on trying to build those skills. And the ones that fail or really struggle don't, and wait to the last minute. So, mate, if you had to, and I'm just conscious of time here because we could talk about this all day, but you've been great to share this so far and we could really dig into this. Now, looking back to where you were, say, when you were 25 and things start to really bubble to the surface for you, because, 25 is when young men start to go, I need to go, I've got to achieve, I want to do something. Looking back at you, what piece of advice would you give your young self? Go back and say, how could you deal with this to make life better? And if you can't think about what advice you give you, what would you give some other young next generation coming through, male or female, in their early 20s that is dealing with a similar sort of scenario?
Great question. So to go back into this succession thing, it's a huge risk for us. And to a point where there's a farmhouse up there waiting for us, but we're not moving back there until it's in concrete because of everything that we've all been through. So for me to go back, there was some strong boundaries. So real clear plan, strong boundaries in place. This can't happen, that can't happen, bang. Do we all agree on that? Yes. Is it written in a document? Yes. That's a big one. So whether you've been through what I've been through or not, I think you've got to set those boundaries.
And get them written down.
The way that I look at this is that the planning bit that you just talked about. So one thing we teach our clients, core values, core focus, 10-year goals, 3-year goals, 12-month goals, 90-day goals. What's our priorities this week? It's as simple as that. And like you said, it's at least 60% of succession in that process. And we actually hold them accountable to that document every single month, because that's the power of that document. And if you've got that document in place, so what it's doing, and leading into that question that you ask, is that it's communication. It's a tool where, okay, we've got to sit down for 2 days and go do our annual planning. It's a communication tool. It's a set agenda. We sit down, the whole family gets to put forward what they want to do and what they want to achieve. And then therefore it's what we call an aligned vision to the best it can be. And if it's not as simple as that, then you bring in facilitators and someone else facilitates your annual planning. And then you come away with an agreed, there's a bit of give and take, but there's essentially an agreed vision. So we're not just rocking up and being reactive this, reactive that, in chaos mode. Is proactive and the priorities in the right spot. So A, it's going to generate a lot more profit, but B, it's actually the main communication tool that we need. And in there, those values where, let's say family is a value and everyone's agreed that family's a value, and then Christmas gets sacrificed because an opportunity comes up to, bale some export straw or something like that, or buy some lambs into the feedlot. Someone in the business can go, hey, actually, family is our value. We're going to sacrifice Christmas for 20 grand or for a potential 20 grand opportunity with some sheep in the feedlot or whatever it might be. Then we can start to have some accountability around our life values and our business values as well.
We'll even just have the vocabulary to have the conversation.
Yeah. So what I'm doing with my kids, and my eldest son's 14 and absolutely loves being on the farm at the moment. So the broad way that I look at it is that the plan is there, the vision's there, and that they're communicating it. Like, we need some new infrastructure and all that sort of stuff going forward. And I'm having that conversation with him, like, where do you think we should build the shearing shed, or what would you do if this was your decision, or whatever. So involving them in the bigger picture, long-term stuff. Then the main part of my advice is a long-winded answer, but is when you're younger, I think it can be a cop-out to come straight home on the farm, both for mum and dad and for the younger generation, because it's mum and dad don't have to go and hire someone and go through the whole hiring process and have someone deal with someone on their farm that's harder to work with. So it's easy to hire son or daughter. It's a cop-out, and it's a cop-out just to go home on the farm, because you don't have to go and work for another boss. You can, mum does your washing and cooks your meals and all that sort of stuff, potentially, as just a bit of a throwaway comment. But so it can be taking the easy path, where for me, what I wish I did is I went to boarding school, met a lot more people, and then went and created my own career before I come home on the farm. So the conversation that I'm having with my son at the moment is that he'll go away for school in year 11 and 12, and then he'll probably go and work on a station. That's what he's talking about, go and work in some successful businesses somewhere else, and have a lot of fun and be a boy and muck around and go learn some skills. But if he's coming home at 26, 27, then there's a few rules that need to be in place. Needed to be able to know business and the key elements of business: leadership, planning, time management, accounting, investing, all that sort of stuff. So he's clear on what those skills need to be that he needs to learn. You can't just go away and have fun for 5 years and go on Kentucky tours and then come home and not know anything and try and take the business over. You actually got to come back.
And expect everything to fall into your lap.
That's it. Yeah, you got to come back with a skill set to take the business over. And then the tricky bit, what I think, and this won't be everyone's vision, but as the older generation, you say, well, I built the farm. I'm staying here till I'm 70 or 80, where my opinion is, and this might change, but this is my opinion at the moment, is that I'm only entitled to the farm until he's ready to take it over. So as soon as he comes back, then I've really got to step out to a point where, like, I need to start looking at setting myself up and my role or my hobbies or my retirement up when he's 28, 29. So it might only be a year that I'll work with him on my farm, or he works for me on my farm, and then it's his. And then he's 28, 29, 30 and can absolutely fly with it, even maybe younger. And I've got to have the discipline to realise that it's not my farm when he's at that age, rather than me get to him get to 40 or 45 and then he gets the farm. Yeah, it's not mine to keep forever. Even my daughter or whoever it might be, whoever wants to be on the farm, it's theirs to take with and run, and I have to get out of the way. Whether that's, there's a role on the farm that they want to recruit me into, or whether that's I go and do something. We've got our own stuff that we want to do when we retire anyway. So I'm pretty sure we'll be able to keep ourselves busy, but I think we need to be disciplined to kind of get out of the way when they're in their prime.
Well, that's the objective. You got to think about what the objective is, Westy. You know, what do you want out of your life? What's the long-term objective? And for most, when you dig into it, is strong family relationships sitting around the Christmas table for dinner. And the second one is that the farming business becomes a legacy that you can hand on to the next generation and the next generation, the next generation. And I explained this to someone the other day. You know, it's like a footy team. You come from a footy background, but, you know, you see the footy teams where all the champions stay for years and years and years, and they don't let the new fresh blood come through. And then they win championships and they might get 10 years straight. But because they haven't produced that next generation coming through and let them come on and lose a few games here and there, bringing up the next talent, when all those oldies retire from the footy team, then the whole team falls in a heap for 10 years and they don't win a game, they don't win a premiership. So we've got to do that. We've got to get out of the road for the next generation coming through if that's our objective. And for most farmers, it is. Now, if that's not your objective and you just want to hang on forever, you have to realise you can't have your cake and eat it too. You've got to find a different way to do it. And if someone believes that, have at it. You know, that's but just be honest with your kids about it. Just be honest with them up front and say, it's my intention to do this and this is the implications, so they know up front. I think that's a really important point of view. And if you don't know the answers, Westy, like especially for the older generation, because I think the younger generation coming through are a little bit different. They're a little more savvy. They're thinking about things differently, whereas as we get older, we get less flexible and less curious. So we get set in our ways. As I said, I'm 47. I find that as I get older, a little bit less curious. And if you don't know, start having the conversations as a husband and wife. Talk to your peers, other people that's done it well. Talk to external, facilitators, mediators, coaches, whatever it might be, to actually start to uncover the conversation yourself so that you've got clarity about your future. Because a lot of parents, the current generation, they can't envisage a compelling future. Off the farm. It's like, well, I can't imagine being off the farm. I love what I'm doing. But then they get to 65, 75, 85, no kids are back on the farm, no grandkids are back on the farm, and then they're miserable. And so they've got to really start to have honest conversations with themselves. And that's tough.
Absolutely. Very, very, very tricky. Yeah, 100%. The other limiting factor just quickly is the expectation, and like I can't imagine, I'm not in that position just yet, but being the older generation and knowing that you probably need to get out of the way, it's ridiculously challenging on so many levels. And I think one of the things that comes up is a level of expectation. They don't know as much as I do. They won't do a good job. What if they stuff it up? I was in the yards last year with my son, and obviously he's 14, so he missed a fair bit of that 5 years of being on the farm, and so I was trying to teach him a few things. We were drafting sheep, and he's good. But I said, mate, if you stand here and do this, and when that sheep happens, you're not turning the rest around, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yep, no worries. And then afterwards I thought, if my dad had told me that, I would have thought, I don't give a shit if it's a better way of doing it. I want to do it my way. So the realisation is it could potentially save us 15 or 20 minutes. Like, we've got to do the best way possible, but I didn't really want to learn from that. I would, if someone else told me that, I would. There's just a family dynamic there as well. So I could then go and say, okay, well, he's going to do it his way. I'm not happy with that. I need to hang on to the farm for a bit longer. But the reality is, when we hand something over, it's not ours to be in control of. And there's lots of other stories around just little things around some friends here of their dad's got something to give to the grandkids, but he won't give it to them because he's put all these conditions on it. So they've just had a heated discussion around you can't put conditions on it. You're either giving it to them or you're not. So I think that's something that we need to think about as the older generation as well, is that we can't expect to put conditions on this 20, 30, $50 million asset or whatever it might be. It's just succession, and what they do with it is what they do with it.
Yeah. I heard a quote once, which I've really took to heart, was, and we might finish off on this, mate, is responsibility without permission to fail is an unbearable burden for the younger generation. So bring them in, give them a massive amount of responsibility, and then not letting them fail to a certain extent is a fearful burden for them, and it puts a lot of pressure on. And then we've all felt it. And I look at my daughter, I do the same thing. I make the mistakes all the time. She's 8. I say, this is how you should do it, Sophie. Let me show you this so I can shortcut it. And she's like, no, I want to do it myself. And it frustrates the hell out of me. So I get the motivation behind it, but sometimes you just got to let them go and let them fail. Obviously, you don't want them to, fall out of the tree and become a quadriplegic. But, if they fall out of the tree, slip and break an arm, well, then, they've learnt that lesson. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to let them go. And as you said, get out of the road and find a compelling future or a vision for the future for you and your wife and grandkids.
That's a very powerful quote. And if you look at any successful entrepreneur, some of the Thomas Edison, all these people, like they've failed and failed and failed and failed. And I think that's I was scared of failing as a kid growing up, because you get in trouble if you back the combine into the shed or something, you're going to get your head ripped off. We didn't deliberately do it. So we need to give a bit of space there to let our kids have a crack and fail and feel comfortable doing it.
Absolutely. And that's around the succession too, because this is the first time the current generation, mums and dad, have done succession. That's hopefully the first and the last time. So they're going to make mistakes. And we've got to realise that this is a journey that's not going to be easy. It's not going to be simple. But if you follow the process and start early enough, it'll be smooth and successful. And I just want to end this off, mate, before I get your last bit of advice, is to say to families out there is succession's hard, but it's really easy in many ways, because if you start early enough, you follow a process, then it becomes smooth and successful at the end. If you leave it to the last minute, it's going to be a fight. That's just the way it is. So you choose your poison. You're either going to pay now with time, effort and energy, or you're going to pay later with conflict and not being able to sit around the kitchen table. You get to choose as a business owner. So Westy, we got way over time, but I think this has been incredibly valuable. I'm super appreciative of the fact that you're able to talk about this publicly. I know it's a difficult thing to do. I don't mind talking about my stuff, but many people don't, and I'm sure it'll be well received. What's one piece of advice you're going to give families out there that are in this process right now that they can take away with them as we finish up?
Mate, and thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully this is value to someone. I think the big one is just making sure that we're planning and having someone around you to help understand how to plan. That whole, what we call the operating rhythm, which is that planning, the values, the tenure, et cetera, is the foundation to any success. Profitability and also communication. I think that's the big one. So go and find out how to do that. And then it's also about implementation. It's all well and good having that, but you need to be able to implement it. It's the same as we all know that we should eat healthy, but generally we don't as a society. So it's easy to live a hard life, hard to live an easy life. It's easy being healthy and fit, but it's hard to do it, if that makes sense. It's hard to get up at 6 and go to the gym and all that sort of stuff. So 2 parts, planning and communication. The other big one for me, something I'm very passionate about, is look after yourself first and foremost, and that's through being disciplined. We have to be super disciplined and do the hard things so fitness and health is one of my values. Absolutely. If I'm not healthy and fit, then I'm running at 40%. There's so much science behind all of that as well. So, make sure even if it's just a walk up the laneway, go and move your body.
And that's including mental health as well, building that resilience upstairs.
It is. There's science out now that your gut health is directly related to your mental health. Yep. So if you're putting the right foods in, we service our tractors, we service our plant, but we never look after ourselves and make sure that we're running at 100% for some reason. So start somewhere. Getting the gym, lifting weights is one of the healthiest things that you can do alongside putting good food in your body. So change your personal habits slightly in the right direction. There's a great book called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson, if anyone is keen to move. Yeah.
Awesome. Right, Westy, mate, thank you so much. Look forward to installment number 2, 5 years down the track, when maybe I can have a chat to your son about how it's gone and whether Dad's lived up to his expectations.
Absolutely. We'll get my dad and my son on the podcast one day.
Sounds perfect, mate. Awesome. Right, Westy, I'll leave you to it, mate.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ben.
Well, That was a cracker of an episode, and I'm super grateful that Westy was able to open up about a lot of those things. It's an amazing journey he's been through, and one that I'm sure many of you out there will have either been in, been on, or seen happen to someone else. Now, before we go off, I just want to nail down a few key points which I think are really important. Well, firstly, be kind and be patient. Now, to mums and dads out there, the current generation, you were once their age and you didn't do everything perfectly, and your parents probably looked at you and thought the same thing. So be patient with the younger generation, especially when they're in their early 20s. You want them to be driven, motivated, and asking questions, and you also want them to be learning and making mistakes. So be patient with them and just remember you were once their age. And for the younger generation who's looking back at mum and dad and thinking, God, what do they know, the old fuddy-duddies in their 50s? Let's just say, well, that's going to be you someday, and you're, if you're lucky enough, going to have kids thinking the same thing about you. They know a lot more than you think, and just be patient with them because this is new for them as well. That's a really important point. They've never been through succession, so they're trying to get it right. They're doing their best. So yeah, be patient and be kind. Another point is start early, get a plan in place as young as possible that everyone's involved in, and document it. Now, I know the statement will be, well, we don't know what's going to happen and there's a lot of variables involved and things could change. And yet that's all true. But also, if you don't have a plan, you're just going to wander aimlessly through, and you're not going to be able to give the next generation that clarity they need. And I think that's a really important point. He hammered that home a number of times around clarity. And you've got to remember, if you start early, you've got to prepare your heirs or prepare the next generation to be not only good farmers or graziers, but also how to become good leaders of the family business, to have leadership skills, financial skills, etc. So you've got to start preparing them to do all those things. But you've also got to prepare yourself. As you hit your 50s and go into your 60s, your role's got to change from being a farmer or a grazier and leading the business to be a leader of the family and a custodian of family wealth. So you've got to prepare yourself, and you've got to get that vision for the future. I know it's hard, and for men, you might not want to think about a change. You love what you're doing, but you've really got to get clear on that and invest the time early on, and making sure that, you don't have to stick with it. If 5 years down the track that vision changes, that's okay, but you need to get a vision as soon as possible and start to have that discussion and get that done ASAP. You also need to start preparing for your retirement financially, so that needs to be on the agenda as well. The third point is you need to get help at any stage. Very, very few people ever manage to go through this transition on their own, and if they do, it'll be much, much harder than you ever could have done if you've got some help. Simple analogy is you could pull out your tooth if it was rotten, but you're going to go to a dentist and get them to do it. They'll do a much better job and much less painless. So yeah, get outside help. And if it's first it doesn't succeed, you ask someone for help and it doesn't work out, don't give up. Don't be a crybaby about it. Get back on the horse and go again. Because remember, failure is just feedback and you need to change your direction. And finally, just the stats on succession and why they fail. And this is a whole episode in itself, but about 60% of the reasons succession fails is a breakdown in communication and trust in the family unit. So that's where you really want to start, is building your skills around family communication and communication with your spouse and your children and your parents, but also how to build trust within a family, because when communication breaks down, trust breaks down. And when there's low trust in a family, that's when you get problems. So how to build trust in the family. About 12% of the reason why successions fail, and I won't go into where I got these details from, but I just want you to focus on the reasons rather than the statistics themselves, is the family not having a family-aligned strategic plan or a family-aligned roadmap. So that is a vision, which is what Westy was talking about, a plan for the future. And about 25% of the reason that successions fail is because the next generation and the current generation haven't prepared themselves for the next, I suppose you say, journey that the family's going to go on. So start with communication, get a plan in place, and start preparing yourself and the next generation for succession in 5 to 15 years. And just remember, professional advisor errors were about 3% of the reasons. It's a smaller percentage overall. You need good advisors around you, but you're not going to get the solution from an accountant, a bank manager, or a financial advisor. They might be able to help you out with some of it, especially the financial side. You need them in the process, process, but they're not going to be able to fix the communication and trust. They're not going to get a strategic plan, and they're not going to be able to prepare the next generation fully. So get the advice from the right people involved. Now, guys, hopefully you got as much out of that episode as I did. If you've enjoyed it, make sure you give us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, 5-star if you think it's worth it. But above all, share it with your family and friends. There's going to be a lot of families out there that either are publicly going through this, they've talked to you about it, or quietly are worried about this or going through this process. So yeah, share it as far and wide as you can. We'd love it. And if you've got any comments or feedback, etc., send us an email, admin@thefinancialbloke.com.au. That's it for this week. We'll catch you in 2 weeks' time.